But for now, I have Gabbie Hanna with me. And Gabbie is a viral YouTuber, comedian, songwriter, and author. I wanted to talk to Gabbie. She's very popular. She has over 5.5 million subscribers. Gabbie, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You're welcome. So 5.5 million subscribers on your YouTube channel. How did that happen?
Honestly, at first on accident, and then from just a lot of consistency. I think that's kind of the key to it is once I started gaining an audience, I just kind of kept them there by posting as much as I could. And besides that, I have no idea.
Well, so how long you been doing this?
Well, I started on Vine, and I did that in 2013, and then I started YouTube in, I believe, 2014. So it's been, almost 4 years?
Right.
Yeah.
I was looking at your channel last night and reading a little bit about you. I was surprised that you are a comedian. You don't look like a comedian.
I actually wouldn't call myself a comedian either. But what does a comedian look like?
You seem too conservative. You know, a comedian.
Oh, wow. I don't hear that often.
Are you a comedian?
I guess it depends who you ask. I don't like to call myself a comedian just because when I think of comedians, I think of like the great stand-ups.
Right.
I don't practice stand-up, but I guess depending on who you're talking to, a lot of people would consider YouTube people comedians. And Bo Burnham put it best one time, actually, because he is an actual stand-up comedian now. And a lot of actual comedians gave him a lot of, crap because they said, you weren't in the clubs, you weren't playing all these nights, you weren't in front of a crowd. And he said, have you ever gotten 20,000 YouTube comments telling you you're awful? I did the scene.
Wow.
So, but I mean, I've done stand-up. I do somewhat funny content on my page, but as far as to say, I don't know if I'd call myself a comedian, if that makes sense. Today, I'm going to recreate my 13-year-old sister's Musicallys. My little sister is very beautiful, she's very smart, she's very talented, and honestly, she's pretty good at Musically, but sometimes when I watch her stuff, I'm like, that's unacceptable! This one is such like the typical young white girl on Musically.
Damn, mommy.
I just want to.
Damn, mommy.
I just want
What type of, I know you on your YouTube channel, you deal with family, relationships, and life as a famous YouTuber. What type of issues people want to know from you about family?
I think that everybody kind of assumes that our lives are so much different than theirs. So I'm just really open about a lot of things in my life. So I think people like that.
Yes.
I try not to be too crazy open about my family just because I try to keep my internet personality to myself and
Yes.
realize that people aren't an extension of me. So I actually keep that stuff pretty private.
I saw something, you talk about relationships too, right?
Yeah, or lack thereof.
And what do you deal with concern in relationships?
I just have a really hard time dating, and I think it must be me. I've decided, but sometimes I think I bring out the worst in people because the situations that I deal with people, it almost seems like I have to be delusional because there will be somebody who everyone's like, oh, this person's great, and then they get in contact with me and they turn into like a psychopath. So it's got to be me, right?
That's amazing. and when you say psychopath, they start doing weird things or what?
Yeah, and like the things that they'll say or do, somebody else who will know that person will say, there's no way that person did that. I'm like,
Right.
no, seriously. Like, I can't believe you've never seen this side of this person. And it has to be me.
How do you see men today?
How do I see them?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Or the type of guys you've gone out with, are they real men? Are they alpha males or beta males?
I mean, I guess I've probably dated both. I don't think that there is a general term for all men, but I date betas for sure.
You date betas for sure.
Yeah.
And what's a beta male?
I think a beta is just somebody who doesn't necessarily have to be in charge all the time. I think sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing.
Do you prefer beta or alpha?
I'm not sure. I guess probably beta because that's what I've dated, but I think alpha males probably have a bit of a problem with me just because I think I'm a little bit of an alpha myself and it just causes a little bit too much.
Are you a controlling kind of a person?
Not in the way that I would ever tell somebody who they can talk to, what they can do. I don't care if you have female friends. I don't care where you're going out.
Yeah.
But I do like to have a sense of control in a relationship where I feel like I'm not being just sort of dragged along and everything's on their terms.
Oh, I see. Were you raised by your father and mother?
I was.
Okay. So you did a serious discussion about Black Lives Matter, white privilege.
Yes. I grew up in a town that was extremely sheltered from the rest of the world, incredibly racist. And while I never hated Black people or other races or identified as a racist, I am able now to look in hindsight at myself and realize that I was raised to believe certain things about certain races, as most of us probably were. But it is really important that if you are not a minority, that you check your white privilege.
When you made that video, I was surprised to hear you say that you believe that white privilege exists. What was so interesting about it, you explained that you grew up poor, meaning
Yes.
that you didn't have a lot of money. You had to work very hard for what you have in life, and that has paid off for you, right?
Yes. I grew up very poor. I was the only white kid on my school bus, and every single day I was bullied. I had no connections, no money, no important last name. Nobody ever handed me anything. I worked really, really hard, and I made something of myself. And I felt that none of that had to do with the fact that I was white.
And then you mentioned white privilege. Explain that to me.
So the way that it was explained to me, and I was somebody who was very much like, no, white privilege isn't real. I came from literally nothing and I had to build my way up. Like, don't tell me just because I'm white, I'm privileged. And then somebody asked me, have you ever walked into a store with a backpack and been followed? Have you ever been stared at because you had a hoodie, or people are afraid of you because you had a hoodie on? And I was
Right.
like, oh no, none of those things. And I think that's what people don't quite understand, is there's just sort of an inherent thing with being white, whether you're poor, however you were raised, that people will look at me differently than they will somebody who is Black. I truly believe that my skin color had 0% to do with any of my accomplishments, and that there was absolutely no way that white privilege had any hand in my success. Then one day I found an article entitled "Explaining White Privilege to a Broke White Person." I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people my color made it what it is. If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Hopefully it's changing now, but it is something that's true. You know, like, even being raised, I was raised in a super small town where if there was a Black person walking towards me on the street, I would feel a different way than if a white person was. And I've grown out of that, thank God. But I think that is what white privilege is just that inherent fear that a lot of people had instilled in them from, media or whatever it is. My parents never had to teach me to not wear a hoodie in public. I have never been worried that I was being followed by a security guard in a store. When I approach somebody in a store or on the street or in a school, I am seen as a wholesome white girl and not a threat. I have never, and probably will never, have the words hooligan or thug used to describe me. People don't fear me for no reason. And I know for a fact that if my boyfriend was shot 4 times point blank in front of my 4-year-old daughter after following an officer's orders, that I would not feel obliged or conditioned to call his shooter sir.
So were you taught that in college, or did you pick it up along the way, or what?
I think that definitely college was when I started realizing that the area that I grew up in was so... just the beliefs that are still, they're stuck in another century. But I think it was honestly more so LA and moving out here where it's super, super more just open-minded and more liberal that I was. And it was definitely an article that I read in LA that made me really get it, because I was probably pretty resistant to the idea of white privilege until 2013 or 2014.
When Black people walk down the road and they hear footsteps behind them, it's the decent Blacks, the hardworking, the family-oriented, those who don't hate white people. When they're walking down the road and they hear footsteps behind them and they look back and they see Black people behind it, it makes them nervous too. They go on to the other side of the road, or they become very aware that these Black people are behind them. Even Jesse Jackson said, when he's walking down the road, and you know who Jesse Jackson is, right?
Of course.
Yeah. When he's walking down the road and he look back and he see white people or something like that, he feel better than he would if he saw black people. Is that black privilege?
I have no idea. I'd be more interested in asking you that question because I wouldn't know how to answer that.
It's not. This whole idea of white privilege is insane. It's not real. It's just a made up lie to cause black radicals to feel good about being wrong. There's no such thing as white privilege. It's so ridiculous that I find, and you're so smart. That's why I was surprised. You're so smart. That's why I was surprised that you fell for that. And I want to know what caused you to fall for that, because black people are afraid of black people. That's why when they make a little money,
white
the first
people are
thing
also
they do,
afraid of white people.
Right.
I think that people are in general afraid of people, but I think that more often white people might feel a fear for black people that they might not fear for white people. And obviously, I don't know everybody. I'm not going to get into the anecdotal of one time I was walking down the street, but again, it was just that having my eyes open to the fact that if I am in a store and a black person is in a store, most people are not going to question me.
You know
and
why?
I used to do crazy stuff in the past.
And the reason for that, I wanted to respond to that too. Black people, especially young black boys and girls, have a history of stealing. It's widespread. Even in the black community, black people are afraid to set up shop in the black community because blacks are known for stealing.
Yeah, I
when blacks come
I don't
in,
disagree, and I don't know the statistics.
So that's why the white merchants have to watch them because they have a history. They have not. The children have not been raised properly.
Sure. And I'm not saying that that's correct or incorrect. I don't know the statistics of how many black people steal versus how many white people steal. But at the end of the day, that statistic does exist. So people will look at you because you are black differently than if you are white because of that statistic. And that is what white privilege is.
But
it doesn't matter if
it's
really true or not.
It's not because you're black. It's black. It's because you're black and have a history.
Do you steal?
Of stealing. No. But because I was raised differently.
Exactly. But because you are black, even though you don't steal, and because of that statistic, people will look at you that way.
Well, the good have to suffer with the bad because blacks overall have not been raised right. And so we have not done anything about it. So when it happened to me, I understand why it is happening.
Right.
It's not personal. That makes sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to argue with a black person that they're wrong about how black people should feel either.
No, you should. If I'm wrong, you should be able to tell me. You should love me enough to tell me the truth.
I mean, I've told you my opinion on it, for sure, yeah. But I respect yours as well.
Back in a moment, folks.
I heard the music coming on.
In that video, you mentioned Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. That was the other thing. Do you believe this organization, Black Lives Matter, that they really care about black people? Do you think they really care about black people?
Yeah, I do. But here's the thing with the organization. I genuinely can say I don't think that I'm informed enough on where it has gone to speak on it. I think I made that video 2 years ago. I do listen to a lot of right and left media. So obviously I hear the pros and cons for the movement. I think that everybody in the movement 100% has great intentions. I don't know the stories of what's been going on with it. So
I think you made this one after the cop killing there in Dallas, Texas.
I don't remember which prompted it. Yeah.
I want you to know that Black Lives Matter is a far left, liberal, radical, evil, agitative organization that was founded by a bunch of radical black lesbians. Don't you love that word? Lesbians.
What's wrong with lesbians?
The word is just so interesting to me. It's like a made-up word. Lesbians.
You think it's a made-up word?
Sound made up, you know?
I think any word sounds made up if you say it enough.
And then black homosexual men and social justice warriors, white radical social justice warrior. Black Lives Matter is worse than the KKK. They are not for the good. And I want people to know that because I think white people kind of go along with them because they're afraid to be called racist. And so they kind of accept this radical organization, but they wouldn't accept the KKK. when you say, you said in that all lives matter, is it necessary when Black Lives Matter say Black Lives Matter, and if white people say, well, all lives matter, they get angry at whites or anyone else, a person like me, for saying, well, all lives matter, not just black. What do you think about that?
I think that people get a little bit hung up on semantics. And I think where people were getting angry with Black Lives Matter and then the All Lives Matter thing was people were trying to make a statement of our lives matter too. They weren't saying Black Lives Matter and nobody else's lives matter. But then the people who said all lives matter, they were basically saying, well, you're not as important. Well, let's focus on everyone. And I think people got hung up on the actual wording and they were just looking for something to argue about. And I think that is literally the last thing to argue about. All lives matter. Of course they do. This isn't a trade. Nobody's trying to exchange black lives for white lives. Nobody's trying to tell you that white people also haven't been killed by officers, and nobody's trying to tell you that black people haven't also killed white people. But there does need to be awareness raised that if not racism, then at least a very deep-rooted prejudice still runs very deep in this country. I think it's interesting to use the word evil, because whether you agree with Black Lives Matter or not and you agree with what they're doing, I genuinely don't think that they're evil people. I think that they believe that they're doing the right thing. And I think the people who are against it believe that they're doing the right thing. And anybody who believes they're doing the right thing isn't really an evil person.
Well, I've interviewed some of those suckers, and they run, they put their tail between their legs and they run. They're not able to be honest because they're not for real. You wrote a book.
I did.
And tell us about your book.
I wrote a grown-up poetry book, but it's like a grown-up children's poetry book. So like sort of Shel Silverstein style with like a sing-songy, rhymey scheme, but they were about very serious topics written through the lens of a child, essentially.
Amazing. How can people get your book?
They can go to Target or Amazon or Barnes & Noble, your local bookstores. It's out there.
One of your popular videos, you're talking about kissing a guy.
Which one? Making out with Shane Dawson?
Shane Dawson.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So that was my good friend Shane, and he basically just said, do you want to kiss for a video to see if we have chemistry? Because people always ship us, is what they call it. So people said, well, you guys would be a great couple, you'd be a great couple, and we didn't see it. So we said, well, let's just like go on a date and kiss and see if we have chemistry, and that was it.
First question, do you want kids?
I'm maybe not intentionally, but if they come on accident, like I'll be like, this is my life now.
Wait, what?
You want kids?
Not intentionally?
I can't imagine myself being pregnant. I would foster children later, but like, do you need to pass on your DNA because you might have to get a surrogate? Okay, wait, do you want kids?
Here's the thing, no.
And so did you go on this date?
The
It's
date
a very
was us
popular
sitting
video,
there.
by the way.
Yeah. Go.
I felt it.
I felt it too.
Okay.
Round two?
Round two, a little longer.
Okay.
That felt good.
I'm feeling some fucking...
My tit.
Cardi, we going for it? We're going for it?
Okay, no, we're going. Okay, ready?
Okay.
Okay. You're gonna play like sexy music under this, right?
Okay, ready? It's kind of sucks that it's one of my most popular videos.
Yeah.
But it was a fun video. It was fun to do, and it was an interesting experiment. And the date was us sitting and getting to know each other and talking, and then the
Right.
kiss at the end.
What do you think about all this uproar about the Second Amendment? The liberals want to destroy the Second Amendment. What do you think about that?
I think, again, this is one of those things, and I'll be the first to say, I don't know all the facts and statistics because I do listen to left and right media, and it seems like both sides take the same statistic and then make it into their own argument.
Right.
So for me, I honestly try very hard not to get too involved in politics because sometimes it's hard to see the truth. Again, I don't think either side is evil. I think that also, though, there is the far left and there is the far right who are both talking very extremes, whereas I think most people on the left aren't saying get rid of guns. Most people are saying we need more intense background checks. We need to outlaw certain guns, whereas the right are saying you're trying to take our guns, and I don't think that's the case for everybody. It's just the people who are screaming the loudest. is generally the case.
I forgot to mention, what's the name of your book?
Oh, Adultolescence.
Adultolescence.
Adultolescence. Like adolescence and adult.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The problem with allowing the liberals to tamper with the Second Amendment, period, by allowing them to ban one gun, they would want to ban two, and so on and so on and so on. And that's why we can't let them do it at all, because it is an evil act, because I have a right as a U.S. citizen, and I'm in a free country, to have whatever weapon I want.
Well, I do think that's an all or nothing type of way to look at it, though, because I think by saying that people want a certain type of gun outlawed or much harder to get if you have some type of background or a history of mental illness, by then saying, well, if we give them this, then they're going to want more and more and more. I think that's just like a very almost narrow-minded way to look at it, because I think that's assuming that people don't want compromise.
I was examining this. And the reason for that is that the gun is not the problem at all. It's not the gun, period. It's the person who's using the gun. They have an issue.
And I think
so
that's
by,
why most people are
taking away
looking
my
for
rights,
background checks. And I know that most places say, yes, you need a background check. The problem is a lot of places like gun shows, I know there's a big debate about that. And a lot of gun shows, of course, are cracking down. But there have been a lot of instances as well of people going to a gun show getting a gun. There's also been people walking into stores getting a gun without a background check. And also the background check isn't extremely extensive. So again, I think it's more so about people just wanting people to go through a much more rigorous process to get a gun. They're not saying don't get a gun. There are very few liberals and left-wing people I know who have said, take away all the guns. Most of them are just saying, can we make it a little harder? Can we get a little more training? And that's really, I think, what it comes down to.
But you can't trust a liberal. A liberal is a son or a daughter of the lie, and they're not going to tell the truth. For example, I was thinking about this last night. I remember when the homosexuals were saying years ago, when they were saying, let us out the closet. We just want to come out of the closet. That's all we want.
I'm guessing you're not pro-gay marriage either?
No.
Okay.
They're like, we want to come out of the closet. And they went on like that for years, right? And so finally, the Christians and conservatives said, all right, we'll let you out of the closet. Just come out of the closet. And now we have so-called same-sex marriage. We have transgender.
Well, it's not so-called same-sex marriage. It is same-sex marriage.
You know, we have all this crap that happens.
So
and the same thing with
what's
abortion.
What's the problem with that?
It's abnormal. It's not normal. And common sense people know that it's not normal. Plus, you're doing a disservice to men and women who are trapped in that lifestyle. Rather than accepting it as being good, we need to show them how to overcome it.
Normal to whom?
To mankind.
Okay.
Human beings.
I guess we're not going to meet on a middle ground on that.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
I think that to say that gay people aren't normal is, I think we're just not going to meet there.
How do you deal with politics at all?
I try to as little as possible.
Right. And why is that? It's not a bad idea, but why is it that you stay away from politics?
Well, I guess the way I should say it is I stay away from politics publicly. I do try to learn as much as I can and consume as much as I can from both sides. It's just that I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding on both sides, and I think that there's also a lot of propaganda on both sides. So I try to sometimes it's just hard to see what's fact.
Oh, I see. Do you believe there's right and wrong?
Of course.
You do?
But I do think there's also gray area.
Gray?
Yeah, of course.
Really?
Yeah.
There's no gray.
Okay.
It's either right or wrong.
That's like a very borderline personality way to look at the world, though.
In what way? Why is that?
Seeing the world in black and white.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a clear way of seeing the world because you see reality when you can see that it's either right or wrong, and it has nothing to do with being male or female, never mind the color. Is it right or is it wrong?
Well, you have to give me some context if you're just going to talk about male or female and color. You know.
The Great White Hope.
I'm not familiar.
You don't know who the Great White Hope is?
Please educate me.
President Trump.
Oh, that's what he's called?
Yes.
Or you call him that?
Yes.
Okay. Is that your nickname that you coined for him?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe that's why I never heard of it. I don't know. I'm sorry.
What do you think about him?
Well, I think he's extremely unprofessional.
Really?
I think that he's exceptionally intolerant. I think that the way he tweets is embarrassing. And if anybody ever tweeted on my behalf, which he essentially is, like that, let's take away the just like agenda and political statements, just the sheer tone of his tweets and the constant typos and grammatical errors. You are the president of the United States. Get it together.
Wow. Everything you just said about him as a negative is what makes him the great white hope.
Okay.
Isn't that amazing? You know what I realize is that this country has not seen a real man in operation in such a big way in the last 60 years that I think we have, not me, but most people have accepted beta men, emotional men, men who think like, and that
Why
like
is
girls.
emotional beta?
Because emotion is abnormal for a man. The men who are emotional have fallen into a fallen state.
That makes me so sad to hear a grown man say that.
And
Do you have kids?
They got their identity from their mother and not from their father. That's why they're emotional.
Do you have children?
I do.
Do you have
I have
boys?
grandchildren. I have great-grandson.
Do you raise them to not be emotional?
Yes.
That makes me very sad.
Boys and girls.
That makes me very sad.
And why is that?
Do you raise both the girls and the boys to not have emotions?
Right.
But more specifically the boys
No,
because
both
that's
the same.
motherly. Well, then you're
They
contradicting
both
yourself.
got to deal with the world. See, boys and girls.
Well,
are
then why are you specifically pigeonholing men as being beta if they're emotional? And then you're saying, well, you raise your girls and your boys to not be emotional. You're contradicting yourself.
Meaning that I raised them to be logical and not emotional. Because
Okay, that's fair if you're speaking, but to say just like emotional, I can understand if you're saying think with your brain and not your emotions. But
Yes.
like, it's good to be an emotional person. That's how
No.
you have empathy.
No.
That's how you feel
Women
for other
hate
people.
emotional men. They hate beta men.
Do not speak for women.
No, they do. They hate beta men.
Really?
Yeah, I was just counseling with the guy.
I just said I date only beta men.
But you don't like them. That's why it doesn't last.
Really?
Yeah.
Who says I break up with them?
They break up with you.
Yeah. Who's to
But
say?
if
It's
they
been both
were
ways.
not beta men, they would be able to deal with you.
Deal with
Aha!
me. No, now you're just being extremely offensive.
In what way?
Be having to deal with me?
Yeah, you know how
Right.
not all, but most women tend to go out of control because they're so emotional.
Right. Most women tend to go out of control because they're so emotional.
Right.
Is that why
And so-
most men are committing violent crime and murder?
But most men, and the reason they're doing that is because they're emotional. They have a lot of anger.
But you just said that women are more likely to lose control.
Meaning that
So again, you're contradicting
in
yourself.
relationships.
You gotta pick a side in the argument.
My point is, it's abnormal for a man to be.
You notice how you're skimming over every
No, I'm
time
coming
I
back-
point out one of your
I know, but
self-contradictions?
what I'm about to tell you,
Okay.
it all adds up.
Okay.
If men and women were logical and not emotional,
Uh-huh.
there would be peace on earth,
You think?
without a doubt. Because logic
Okay.
is real love.
Okay.
An emotional person doesn't have real love.
I think that we could probably debate that for a very long time.
Do you disagree?
I do. I think that you have to be logic and emotional, but I think that if people were a little more emotional, which would make them a little more empathetic, then there wouldn't be as many problems as we have. I think the problem is people try to read too much into documentation and they like hang too heavy on words and semantics and they try to do like the math of the world instead of just trying to understand one another.
I'm looking at the clock here. I have an email from, she says she's one of your biggest fans. Ask what right-wing content she listens to.
Sure. I can't believe I'm going to admit this publicly. I listen to Steven Crowder so much. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I am.
Love his stuff. Ben Shapiro, but mostly I get my Ben Shapiro news through Steven Crowder because I think Steven Crowder is very entertaining when he does it. I don't agree with everything he says. I appreciate his argument style very much, and I do appreciate how informed he is a lot of the time.
Right.
I do think that he tends to skew statistics sometimes. I do see him contradicting himself sometimes, as does anybody who's debating. But I would say that's where I get most of my right-wing stuff, and he covers most of the topics that anybody would care about.
Yeah. And why do you like Ben? Ben is a good friend, by the way. Why do you like him?
Same reason. I mean, I do think he's a very logical person.
Yeah.
But I also, again, think that sometimes he thinks only logically and looks too much into statistics and can skew things his own way. Again, the left does the same thing.
Right. What do you think that about the fact that the left don't want men to speak at the universities around the country now?
Oh, I don't know anything about it.
No.
I don't think it's right.
Yeah, no, they've been.
As long as he's doing it in a respectful way and not inciting violence. I don't know if there's like an instance that are making people specifically not want him to do it, but if he's, being peaceful and being respectful, I don't see any problem why he shouldn't.
What's your website or your YouTube site? How can people get you?
Gabbie Hanna on everything, The Gabbie Show. If you Google Gabbie, it'll pop up.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
You're doing really, really well. I wish you well.
Thank you so much for
Continued
having me,
success.
too. This was cool.
Yeah.
Woke
thank
me
you.
up, that's for sure.
Straight, white, Christian.
No, Jesse, this is the subscribe thing.
Oh, yeah. I need you all to subscribe, support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook, and follow me on Twitter.
Got it.